Welcome to the Creating Neurodiversity-Affirming Schools podcast. I am Emily Kircher-Morris.
And I'm Amanda Morin. And today we're talking about neurodiversity-affirming communication, which feels really timely to me, Emily. I had a conversation with my neurodivergent ADHDer yesterday. I had just come back from a conference and had been gone for almost a full week. And he had so many things he wanted to tell me. So many things, right? There was just everything at once. And I was overwhelmed. I needed to decompress and all of those kinds of things. And we had an interesting conversation about the difference between you need to listen to and I want to tell you about. And it was really sort of like we clashed in communication styles in a way that we hadn't in a really long time, because he was just like, I need to tell you all of these things. I need to tell you all of these things. And I want you to know this and I want you to know that. And you need to listen to me. And I had to slow it down and say, I'm not able to listen right now because I'm not able to process this information because my system is overloaded and my brain is not doing it the way I expect it to. And it was this interesting realization for the two of us that we were overlapping communication in ways that we didn't anticipate. So we had to sit down and really parse out the difference between I need you to listen to and I want to tell you about. And then it was an interesting conversation. In the end, I think everybody heard what they wanted to get heard and they told the stories they needed to, but it could have really caused a blow up, I think, in our house because we were just crossing paths, communicative paths. And it made me really think about the fact that when we, as neurodivergent people, when we have neurodivergent students, when we have neurodivergent students and neuronormative students, there are so often these opportunities to figure out what is being said without making assumptions. And we drop the ball sometimes, and I know I do it as an adult, right? I know that I expect people that are going to say what they mean and mean what they say. And that's not true.
Well, the tricky part about this is that even when there is direct communication, and it is very direct, even that can be misinterpreted, let alone when we're relying on inferencing and reading between the lines and hidden social rules that change based on the environment that you're in. And for our kids in school, this can be really tricky. We talk a lot about the benefits of being really explicit with our expectations and our instructions. And that's one way when we talk about neurodiversity affirming communication that we can interpret that. But the other piece about direct or explicit communication is that it can be interpreted as blunt or rude. And often it depends on who's hearing that information with how it is interpreted. It also depends on who is receiving it. Is it a person in power or a person who has less power? What is that hierarchy there? And neurodiversity affirming communication is tricky, but ultimately, the way that I default to this when I'm working with my clients in the office is I do a lot of check-ins. Does that make sense? Or what do you think about this? Or the other piece that I do is asking if I can explain further. Can I give you some more information about that? Just kind of that quick little check-in before I launch into all of the information that I think they need. And sometimes that can help with whatever reaction may come after that.
Yeah. I do a lot of that with the students I work with too. And I always sort of upfront give them permission to ask me to clarify and use different words, right? I actually have taught most of the students I work with the phrase, can you use different words to explain that to me? Because sometimes that's what they need, is they need to hear it in different words. And it can often be frustrating for students to have to not only try and figure out the information we're presenting them, but also to try and figure out how to ask for it in a different way. So I think part of that explicit teaching is teaching students ways to ask for clarification that makes sense to us, right? To be able to say, can you rephrase that? I need to hear that in a different way, so that it's not seen as being, students aren't being seen as difficult. They're not being seen as not paying attention, that they're really just saying to you, I really want to get this, but I'm having trouble understanding it the way it was presented to me.
I think that this is something that we can all be just more intentional with. We can really reflect on how our communication is coming across. And that is the conversation that I have today with Meg Wolf, a neurodivergent educator and parent to neurodivergent kids. And so she's got some great ideas about how we can really integrate this into our classrooms.
When I was in school, I wish my teachers had understood that I wasn't lonely. I had exactly the number of friends I could manage, and asking me to participate more or get involved in after-school activities made life so much harder for me. It wasn't that I was lonely, it's that understanding how other people interacted was really hard for me, and the more I tried, the more exhausted I got. And looking back now, I know that my teachers didn't understand that I communicated in different ways and that I didn't mind being alone, which is still true. I wish they'd known that was okay. And it's something that I make sure teachers understand about my own children. It's why the book Emily and I wrote together, Neurodiversity-Affirming Schools, Transforming Practices So All Students Feel Accepted and Supported, felt so needed to me. The book is a guide for all educators who are passionate about making sure their neurodivergent students can be successful and about creating systemic change that our schools need as we create a more neurodiversity-affirming world. It's also why we created professional development courses for schools and districts to use to begin integrating these practices with your students. You can find more information about the book and courses at neurodiversity-affirmingschools.com or click the link in the show notes.
Today, I'm speaking with Meg Wolf. She's an advocate, an educator, and a mom who is deeply immersed in the world of neurodiversity. Meg is twice exceptional, and she navigates life as an ADHDer and also experiences a lot of sensory processing differences, which brings a wealth of lived experience to her work. When her daughter received an autism diagnosis, she dove headfirst into understanding ADHD, autism, and pathological demand avoidance, or PDA, and ultimately realized her own neurodivergence along the way. Now she's channeling that knowledge into building supportive communities like Neurodiverse Connections and fostering neuroempathy, which helps families and individuals embrace their neurodivergent identities with confidence and compassion. So, Meg, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Emily. Thanks for having me.
So I want to just start off with a question we're asking all of our guests, and that is, what does it mean to you to be neurodiversity affirming?
I think being neurodiversity affirming means you're always willing to look for other reasons why a conversation or a behavior may be not what you're expecting. So you're looking for context. You're looking for the reasons that somebody may be experiencing this. And we're always looking for clues. We're always curious instead of looking at something and saying, this person's not fitting in the mold and we need to fix that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We notice that there are reasons that students struggle in classrooms if there are a lot of other students around them, if they're trying to filter through all the processing that they need to be doing. We have different processing speeds. Some kids process so quickly and they want to answer the question before you're done asking it. And waiting is excruciating. There are gifted ADHDers out there that cannot stand the torture of waiting. It's just torture. So is that rudeness? No. Or is that just enthusiasm and yes, and let's get to the next part. Mm-hmm. Keep going, which is tough because awareness of the other people around them, the other students all learning at different speeds can be just not a strength because you're enthusiastic and into what we're discussing. So yeah, I think that whenever you're trying to get a group of students together in a classroom with one teacher who's doing the amazing job of trying to meet every student's needs, it's really asking for a very tricky balancing job. And I think that things that we may have considered bad behavior, I always want to look deeper at that and figure out why that's happening. What does that behavior serve? And not as a trying to get out of something or even if it is an avoidant behavior, is it avoiding it because they're not capable of it in that moment? And those are some of the things that I find where when I work with teachers and I talk with people that work with children a lot, is that it's hard to understand that fluctuating capacity, that the fact that I could do this today, but I may not be able to do it tomorrow. if a student is trying to repeat the same performance over and over and over again, that's something that's a lot to ask of a neurodivergent student. And yet to an adult, it may seem like they're willfully denying or willfully, avoiding something.
You touched on a few things about what being neurodiversity affirming means that are related to communication. And that's what I really want to dive in with you. Just to start off, you mentioned kind of their bandwidth or what they're capable of, that might fluctuate. What are some of the other unique considerations that we need to keep in mind when we are communicating with our neurodivergent students?
I love this question because there's no one right answer, right? So we're always looking for reasons why a student may be struggling in a certain situation. Were the directions for this exercise or for expectations clearly communicated in a way that this individual can process it? Does the student need more visual reminders? Does the student need fewer verbal directions? Does the student need to see the end product? There are different ways to make sure that each student understands what the expectations are. The other thing that I always hear my autistic friends and I always say, but where is it written? Show me where it says it. What are the expectations? Tell me what you really want. Tell me clear as kind is this, phrase that we use in the autistic community. And if you tell me exactly what you want from me, then I'm more likely to be able to give you that. Even I, as an autistic ADHD adult, there's times when my husband asks me a question and I will immediately have an explosion of possible answers, but it's really, I'm still trying to understand the question that he asked. What did you mean by that? What answer do you want? I want to give you the answer you want, but I'm not sure what that question means. And so sometimes it's a little more processing, but sometimes it's also clarification of your question. And if a student asks for clarification of the question, they're not being difficult. They really are trying to answer this question for you. They're not challenging you. And repeating it louder doesn't make it easier to understand.
Right.
If a child is consistently struggling in certain places, we want to find out why. And we want to find out what we can do to support that student and not just write them off as like a behavior, a pain in the butt.
Yeah. Recognizing those different types of communication and recognizing that it's not necessarily just what a student is saying, but it's also how they are interpreting what is being communicated to them. So you're a member of the educator hub that we have over at Neurodiversity University. And I remember we had a conversation. I was actually sharing about my son, Trevor, in a situation that he was having at school. I was sharing something about how he had interpreted something. And the teacher had asked him some question like, why aren't you getting started on this? Or why aren't you doing this? And I really loved how you had kind of, off the tip of your tongue, were able to process that and think about like how he's interpreting that based on how he might be reacting. Do you remember that conversation?
I do remember that. I mean, I think anytime somebody asks me, why aren't you X, Y, and Z, it immediately makes me defensive. It doesn't make me feel like I want to, it makes me need to prove and it makes me defensive. And that's my personality, is that then I'm eager to please. But for somebody else who gets anxious and defensive, they may check out and decide that, well, if you're not going to take the time to understand me, I'm not going to waste my time with you. I think it feels like an accusation often. Why aren't you getting started? I'm preparing in my head. I'm arranging my thoughts, or I'm getting my tools, or I don't know. And it creates this panic. And then at that point that your nervous system is so flooded, it's really hard to continue to stay rational and answer calmly. But if somebody comes up to me and quietly sidles up to me and is like, hey, I'm noticing you haven't started writing. Is there something you need? So it's instead of, why haven't you done what I said? It's like, how can I help? Is there something going on? I think it's always just an approach, a collaborative approach with students is the best way to come at anything, is to just say, is there something extra that you need? What else can I do to help make this easier? What would help you. And I think we've talked about this before, where sometimes students don't know accommodations that would help them. They don't know what it is that's stopping them. Mm-hmm. But sometimes even just that moment of having someone else notice that something's stopping them helps that, like, that side by side, that body doubling together. Maybe we can figure this out. And there can be any number of things stopping. Writing is staring at a blank sheet of paper when you have so many ideas in your head, and when it's such an enormous, amazing, complex tale in your head. To sit down and make some of that information come out of your pencil feels so daunting. And that can be the processing, the reorganizing of the thoughts in your head. That can be, trying to, if you're struggling with spelling, or if you're struggling with like dysgraphia, or just making the fine motor skills of writing. And so then we want to know if there's, hey, if we try it like this, what if you tell me some of your ideas, and maybe if I get you started with a sentence, maybe we can go from there. Maybe even just having a sentence on paper feels like a way to start. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, it's making the job smaller and kind of focusing the students a little bit. But a student's not going to say, I don't know how to get started. Mm-hmm. They'll just say, I don't know, I can't. I don't know, I can't. And so we always want to stay as curious as possible and figure out what that is. I think that students are aware that they're not doing what they're being asked to do. I think it would be hard to not be aware of the fact that a lot of your fellow students are happily writing away. Mm-hmm. And so you already feel defeated. And that negative self-concept, that concept that like, oh, I'm stupid, or I suck at this, it's not worth it. I'm never going to do it well anyway. And that's so sad to me to see in a young student, because so many of us are just learning these skills to begin with. How can we know whether we're good or bad at them yet? But if they've come more quickly to other students, it feels incredibly frustrating. Or if our hand can't move as fast as our brain. It's never just one thing, right? And it's never the same thing with every student. So I think if educators can approach each student with as much like understanding and collaboration and teamwork as possible, and get curious and experiment. I don't know, you want to try this? It might help.
Yeah.
I don't know if it will. Maybe it won't. Maybe this is a terrible idea, but let's just throw this one out here.
Well, and I love the piece that you just mentioned right there about maybe it won't work, kind of reducing that power hierarchy, like I have all the answers. Like the minute we are collaborative with our students, it makes such a big difference. And the other thing I hear you really talking about is presuming competence and having high expectations. Yes. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're harsh about it. Like I think sometimes people hear that and it's like, oh, well, they should be able to do this. No, presuming competence means I think you can do this and you might need this little boost. You might need this little like something to kind of get going on it, but recognizing that there might be something else going on. And if we can just give that little, like turn the ignition, get it going just a little bit, we can help those kids make progress.
I like to think about teaching. Teaching has shifted so much in the last, 30 years, 10 years. I mean, it's a different place, right? But I think that if we can think as much as possible about facilitating learning rather than teaching. So if we're approaching things together, like my goal as a teacher is the same as the student's goal, is like, I'd love for you to be able to like capture these amazing ideas in your head on paper. So like, let me help. Let's figure it out together. I'm your like a teammate instead of the person who's going to grade you and get it wrong. I think that that's something I learned from my acting world, was that when you go in and you audition, the casting director wants you to be the one. Like they want their job over. They want to cast you. They're not here to like grade you and find all your mistakes and think you're terrible. They really want you to do well. And I think teachers want their students to do well, but it feels sometimes like if they're grading me and they're going to be the ones that are going to point out my errors. And, math is always tricky because there is a right and a wrong answer often. And I think it's nice to try to allow as much flexibility as possible in the math, because some of our highly capable math students, it's nearly impossible to capture that flash of thought that gets them to the answer. And we know that's always a place where kids struggle with the like, show your work. And I have like children that I work with that are like, no, I'm not going to. That's stupid. And that's a waste of my time. And it's important for teachers. Again, this is one of those communication things. If teachers cannot look at that as disrespect, if it's possible for you to say, like, this kid is telling me that, like, they are so bored, they're so beyond this, and that showing their work is really tricky for them, either because it's too tedious, or because they can't capture like what the 18 processes were that their brain just did to get this amazing answer. If it's important for the teacher to know that the student is approaching this like a certain way or understands this method, could the teacher ask questions and say like, oh, did you regroup and count up to this number and then grab this number from over here? Or I'm curious, how'd you get it so quickly? And just, again, that's that interest instead of you didn't show your work. Those are really different experiences for a kiddo where the kid feels lit up then and like, oh, wow, they're interested. I've got something to offer instead of, once again, I didn't measure up. And this isn't teachers intentionally doing this, but I think that so many of us neurodivergent folks we can be so sensitive to perceived slight. It's that rejection sensitivity. And our perception is different. Our perception of communication is different. The same way people can think that, someone maybe is a little too blunt, who maybe is autistic and like, oh, she's such a blunt communicator. But maybe it's like, well, no, that was inaccurate. So I want to correct you because accuracy is important for me. And I understand that.
Oh, me too.
I think Mattia Murray once said that most autistic group communication, the goal is to attain the highest level of agreed upon accuracy. So like when you're talking and you're like piling on top of each other, like, no, this and that, no, it's more like this. It's more like, oh yeah, that's that. Like, we don't mind being corrected then because we're approaching a place of accuracy. Whereas if being corrected is, no, you're wrong, you didn't do this the way it said to do this, that feels that, people take offense, so they're going to be affronted by that and not feel like you're working with them. And so our kids there's so much more going on in their brains. We're not as simple as we used to be. I don't know. Like there's more options for us or
we just viewed it as a discipline issue and we punished kids and they either learned to suppress all of that and had a ton of anxiety surrounding it.
Yes.
Or not. And they continued to have what was, considered disciplinary issues. And now we have a greater awareness of this. We have a better understanding of it. And still we have so far to go.
I do feel so much for educators because the entire school system is set up for like this person is superior, this teacher or this principal or this whatever is hierarchically superior to you. And therefore, because they are your teacher and you are in their class, you need to just accept what they say and do what they say without that teacher needing to earn your respect. Day one of class, you're expected to follow these rules, and the rules can feel very arbitrary to some students. And now that parents are sort of parenting in maybe a more gentle, more open-minded way, there's less, in some communities, right? It's a privilege, right, of parenting your children this way. But like rather than do it because I said so, it becomes like more of a conversation about like, well, what's going on? Why is this feeling tricky for you? Why does this feel too hard? And so that's two adults often in a family with a few children. It's not one adult in a class of 25 people with the expectations of get through chapter 4.3 so that you can do 4.4 tomorrow and be on track to finish, this semester on time. There's not a lot of leeway. So when kids are used to not like negotiating or discussing things and coming to an agreed upon expectation with adults, there's not a lot of room for that necessarily in traditional classrooms, unless you set it up that way from the beginning. But then you throw that at a teacher, it's like, I have a lot of teachers that are like, I don't know what to do. He just said no, he won't do it. What do I do? What do you do if a student just looks at you and says, no?
Right.
It's tricky. You got to find out that relationship is what may save it. And if it turns into a power struggle, the teacher's not going to win the power struggle because the student may comply and do what, finally just to get out of whatever punishments, but they're not learning at that point, or they're not building. That's not the point of the education.
Right.
Is it this task? Is it this? So again, are you teaching or are you facilitating learning? And I think I would much rather stand up in front of a classroom and tell people all the things I know. It's much harder to facilitate and work with each individual student, which is why I'm not a teacher. But I think that's what we're looking at in this world.
Meg Wolf of Neurodiverse Connections, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Oh, Emily, thank you so much for having me and for the work you do.
Emily, I always love listening to Meg talk because she's so enthusiastic and she brings just so much to a conversation, and her enthusiasm and joy for what she does is so clear. And when she talks about neurodivergence, she is so neurodiversity affirming, right? It's so clear to me. And so when I think about this and we start circling back to what we want to make sure people take away from this episode, the one thing that I think I really want to stress that comes out of this conversation with Meg is that neurodiversity affirming communication really just presents the information in neutral ways. It takes away any of that moral judgment. It takes away things being good. It takes away things being bad. And it just says, this is what is. And I think Meg does such a good job of that. And I think it's something for teachers to keep in mind, that it's okay to just describe what you're seeing in the way that you're seeing it without putting any sort of opinion or judgment or anything else on top of that.
It is a shift, and we have to be really intentional with it. But I always say the language that we use conveys our values. And so when we say something that might seem innocuous, it really can be interpreted differently. And just really being careful about how we are presenting information to our students and making sure that there's not some other implication there, that we really are supportive, that we're not damaging our rapport with them while we are talking to them. What this also allows us to do is set the stage for self-advocacy. We talk so much about self-advocacy, kind of in the same way that we talk about self-regulation. But you'll notice a lot of times when we talk about self-regulation, that conversation has evolved, and now we talk about co-regulation as a stepping stone to self-regulation. And I almost think with self-advocacy, I may be coining this phrase right now as we're talking about this. I don't know, but co-advocacy, I don't know, maybe that's a real thing, but I don't think we talk about it in this space.
Well, I talk about it as like capital A advocacy and lowercase a advocacy, right? When we are advocating with our students, it's a capital A advocacy so that we can teach them to do lowercase advocacy on a daily basis.
We have to open the door for self-advocacy. I always, suggest to people, like, think about a time that you had to advocate for yourself in a situation. Almost always, that brings up feelings of anxiety and discomfort because it's hard to state your own needs when the person who you're expressing those to may not really understand them.
Yeah.
We are also brought up in a society that teaches us to be grateful and to kind of go with the flow, not to cause too many problems. And when you self-advocate, it pushes back against all of those things. And so if self-advocacy is so difficult for us as adults, think about how hard it is for kids. And so we push them to self-advocate. We encourage them to self-advocate. But if we are not giving them tools, if we are not scaffolding that, if we are not teaching them how to do it, and if we are not inviting that advocacy, they're not going to be able to do it. And so what does that look like? It might just look like checking in. One of my favorite ideas about this actually came from a presentation I was doing with a school district. And this teacher was talking about, one of her students was asking for help. And so she said, okay, well, come on up here to the customer service desk.
Yeah.
And she had this little student desk next to her desk that she just called the customer service desk.
Love that.
And it was a great way to just normalize that asking for help. It's like, that's my job. That's what I'm here for. This is the place where you come to do it. And it's normal for everybody to need to come up to this customer service desk at some point in time. And I just really loved that way, not only for neurodiversity affirming communication, like just, again, bringing people into that process, but just with the destigmatization of that asking for help and making it okay for students to approach that.
And knowing that they're going to get the help that they ask for, right? Because the other piece with self-advocacy is, I think, both adults and kids get nervous about it because they're worried it's going to be denied. And when you have a customer service desk, that's what you're there for. You're there to be helpful, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would say the last thing that I want to circle back to and make sure that I hit on is that when we talk about neutral information, when we talk about self-advocacy, when we talk about neurodiversity-affirming communication, I want to really stress that absolutely want to be strengths-based, right? We want to recognize the strengths that our students have. We want to bring to the surface the things that they do well, that they feel confident about, that we know that we can build on. But I think what we also need to remember is it's okay to acknowledge that there are areas of need. I don't want that to get lost in the conversation. I want to make sure it's really clear that that's something we should just normalize as well. Everybody has things that they do well, and everybody has things that they need support with. And so when we use that neutral language, it doesn't mean we take away or don't talk about those skill deficits. We talk about them in ways that just says, this is true. This is true. This is something that this child needs help with. And this is something that they do well. I mention it because I think sometimes when we have these conversations, a lot of times educators will say to me, well, am I not supposed to talk about what they have trouble with? And my answer is no, absolutely. Let's talk about what they're struggling with too, because that's important. And we can talk about that in ways that just acknowledges the truth of it. We're not saying don't talk about what's tough. We're saying talk about all the things. Just talk about them in ways that feel comfortable, that invite people into the conversation, and not just have to listen to a list of strengths and deficits.
I think one thing that actually this makes me reflect on as well, when you're talking about this strengths-based language, we shouldn't use euphemisms for things that are difficult. It's okay to call a disability a disability. Part of being able to have conversations that are neurodiversity affirming are also just about calling something what it is. We can say somebody is autistic without necessarily saying, oh, well, they're on the spectrum, or, something that kind of lessens it a little bit. Part of that is also just about us getting comfortable with that a little bit. And that is a shift. I know that's a shift. And so just one other thing to think about as we kind of move forward with this process. And I guess the last thing that I will just mention here with all of this is always just check in with your kids. If they have a preference for something, if they have a way that they like to refer to something for themselves, we can always defer to that, because we don't need to correct somebody as far as what they consider language that they use as they refer to themselves with some of those different terms. So thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you next time.